Okay, hello. So I recently played in a Monarch format tournament on Format Library, and I made top 4, so it was a very small tournament. And I brought extra deck Monarchs, and I'll be honest, I made a bunch of misplays and illegal plays. So in this video I want to discuss a couple of interactions which you need to be careful about when you play extra deck Monarchs in that format. Okay, let's start with the extra deck locks. When you're playing extra deck monarchs, there are 4 cards basically which lock you into not being able to use the extra deck, which are Idea, Eidos, your Stormforth, and your Return. The thing with Idea and Eidos is important. Only when they use their summon effect, you're locked into not using the extra deck for the rest of the turn. So if you use the Grave effect of Idea to add back a banished monarch spell trap, or you use Eidos effect to get an additional normal summon, both do not lock you, only Eidos effect to bring something back, or Idea's effect to summon from the deck, which is really important. You can make extra deck summons prior and then use them later during the turn, then you were able to perform an extra deck summon before that. With Stormforth just says in general that you cannot make extra deck summons during the turn you activate that card. The thing which is important when the activation of the Monarch Stormforth is negated, you can still perform extra deck summons. That actually happened to me in a game against Pendulum Magicians. I used the Monarch Stormforth, the activation, which was the important part, was negated by a Vortex Dragon, and then I was still able to make a rank 5 Xyz play. So this is something important when you want to both use Stormforth and an extra deck play, that you can potentially bait out a negation with the Stormforth first and then make the extra deck play. If the extra deck summon though is negated, it still counts as an attempted summon. So if I make an extra deck play and it gets hits with Solemn Strike, this is an attempted summon, then I still cannot use the Monarch Stormforth. This was changed at later points, but in 2016 attempted summons were still a thing. Return of the Monarchs just states in general while it's face up that you cannot summon from the extra deck. So you really have to be careful to not activate the card preemptively. Otherwise you go like return, then Brilliant Fusion, then you're just sad because you cannot do that. The thing is though that you can use your Kuras to blow up your own return, and then you can still perform extra deck summons. So usually you just hold the return, make all of your extra deck plays, and then when you're about to commit your Ether play, you activate return, activate both, and then you summon your Kuras, blow up the return, then you can make extra deck plays again. Okay, the next important thing is that Kuras is a when you can effect, meaning that Kuras misses timing. So if Kuras isn't summoned as Chain Link 1 basically, then you cannot use Kuras effect to pop stuff and draw. Another thing which is important is that there was still the old ruling with simultaneous effects go on chain. It was not exactly the case, so if you fancy to tribute summon your Ether, then you have to use Idea's effect as chain link 1, because even though like nowadays you could use Ether chain link 1 and then Idea is chain link 2, but when it was ruled that Idea quote unquote hit the graveyard first before the summon was committed, so stuff which is sent to the graveyard as a summon requirement has to trigger first in the chain link. And what that does is that like your Idea then goes chain link 1, and then your Eva as chain link 2 activates, you Monarch spells, and then you summon your Kuras. But then the thing is, Kuras was summoned as chain link 2, not as chain link 1, and therefore Kuras would miss timing. So that's the annoying thing. If you like summon Eva that way, you have to not use the optional effect of Idea if you still want to use the effect of Kuras. So usually you have to be kind of careful there. If you're able, in this point it's useful if you have like a domain, reduce your Eva then down to 6, and then that you can keep the Idea on the field, and then you can just summon the Kuras as chain link 1, you do not trigger Idea as it wasn't in the graveyard, and then you can just pop Idea with Kuras, and then you can still get your ad back. But that's not always the case, and a mistake which kind of easily happens. Okay, now let's talk about the big monarchs, Erebus and Ether. So the first thing which is important to remember is that when you tribute summon them, you have to send spells and traps with monarch names. they have to have different names. That's something which can come up during the late game, that you just don't have many different names left in your deck. You want to say, and the same spell at the same time, that is not legal. Another part is that you don't have to send from your deck, you can also send from your hand, which is in a late game situation sometimes relevant. The next part, like with Erebus doesn't target when you shuffle something back, which can come up. And with the graveyard effect, it's important to remember that you can only use it during the main phase. I, for instance, always forget that part. And also for some reason you're actually able to add back Volcasaurus, because Volcasaurus has exactly 1000 defense points and more than 2400, which is something you can easily miss. But you can obviously add back also like your Ether and so on. Okay, next with Ether, please remember when you summon something off of Ether, it is bound during the end phase. It's something to easily miss. Then the big stuff with Ether is like the Ether plus the Monarch Stormforth play during the opponent's turn, allowing you to get rid of an opponent's monster. Please remember, Ether has to be used first before the Monarch Stormforth if you want to use them during the same chain. If you like use the Monarch Stormforth in an earlier chain, that's obviously not relevant. Yeah, and you actually need to be able to perform a tribute summon with Ether when you activate the effect. Like if you just have a random monster on your field which was not tribute summoned, you're not actually able to activate the Ether's effect, which is something to easily miss. Also, speaking of it, both of Erebus and Ether are not hard ones per turn, so if you have like 2 copies of Ether in your hand, you can use both during your opponent's turn, which is kind of sick. Okay, and lastly I want to show you a little combo you have. If you have like Ether and Domain, you can use Domain, reduce Ether's effect down to 6, then use Ether's effects and like, I don't know, Prime and Pantheism, summon your Kuras. If you want to, you can pop also the Domain and draw stuff. And now you can actually make an extra deck play if you're not locked, and make your Ptolemy M7, its Ptolemy M7's effect, detach your Ether and add it back to hand, and then you obviously send the Pantheism, you can banish the Pantheism and just reveal triple Monarch Stormforth, and then that way you have again the Stormforth Ether play, and you're probably also able to draw a couple of cards with Kuras and so on. That's also a nice effect. Yep. Okay, next let's talk a bit about some Brilliant Fusion interactions. So the first thing with Seraphonite and Eidos, both have an effect to gain you an additional normal summon, but this does not stick. Even if you summon both during the same turn, you only get 1 additional normal summon because of like the clause that you can only gain that normal summon additional once per turn. Another thing with Brilliant Fusion is that it has the effect to be able to discard a spell card, giving the fusion monster you summoned the original attack and defense back. This can be relevant like discarding a Pantheism, or just in general another spell, to have another spell in your graveyard to be able to shuffle back with the Prime Monarch, and so on. Another thing, like if you draw Garnet, you have the interaction that you can just make your Durandal, and Durandal allows you to shuffle back both players' hands, and thereby you can shuffle back your Garnet and still use your Brilliant Fusion again. Another fact, when we're talking about Durandal, Durandal has an effect to negate monster effects, spells, or traps, but only negates normal spells or traps, so you cannot negate continuous spells or traps, quick play spells, and so on. And the shuffle effect has also interactions in the Monarch mirror match, where when your opponent goes, okay, effect of Ether in the hand, you can go, okay, I'll chain Durandal and just shuffle your Ether and then both hands back away. And with that, Ether cannot resolve successfully as Ether is back in the deck, which is kind of cool. Another thing, when you're using Brilliant Fusion, if you have like the nuts hand of Brilliant Fusion and Pantheism, please use your Pantheism first, because with your Brilliant Fusion you will most likely send an Idea, and then Idea allows you to add back a banished Monarch spells and trap. And that's something you can like easily forget if you have a very broken hand and you just like shotgun the Brilliant Fusion first. If you think it's like super broken, you can like activate the Brilliant Fusion obviously first if you're afraid of drawing your Garnet, but in general it is better to use your Pantheism first. Okay, couple more interactions. So with domain of the monarchs, if you have like multiple copies of domain in your hand, can use domain effect, reduce for instance an Erebus to level 6, activate another domain, and then reduce Erebus level to level 4, and then just normal summon Erebus because it's just a level 4 monster. This is something which can come up when you're facing a forking and you're not allowed to tribute summon. So in extra deck monarchs, that's a play which very rarely occurs. Another thing with return of the monarchs, remember that it allows you to search a monster, but you can only search a monarch with a different name than the monster that you just tribute summoned. And return usually plays around Solemn Strike, because you can go, okay, effect of Erebus, chain link 1, return chain link 2, and then your opponent cannot use Solemn Strike, which can be kind of big against trap decks. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the Prime Monarch. So the thing which is relevant with the Prime Monarch's effect to shuffle back and to draw a card, you do not have to shuffle both targets back. It is enough if you just shuffle one target back. So you can go chain link 1, the Prime Monarch, for instance target both of the spells, and then go the Prime Monarch, chain link 2, banish one of these spells, summon back the Prime Monarch, and then you will just shuffle back one spell and still draw a card. This is relevant if you don't have that many monarchs, spells, and traps in your graveyard, to still be able to draw stuff without like getting rid of all the spells and traps you have in your graveyard.